네, 시청자 여러분 안녕하십니까? 이지우입니다. 오늘 글로벌 구루에게 듣는다에서는 마크 모비우스캐피털파트너스 설립자와 함께합니다. 모비우스는 40년 이상 신흥국 투자를 이어온 투자의 구루로 꼽히는데요. 특히 신흥국에 숨어있는 유망 기업들을 발굴해 장기간 투자하는 것으로 유명하죠. 마크 모비우스 이 자리에 나와 있습니다. First of all, please briefly introduce yourself to the viewers.
Right. Yeah, my name is Mark Mobius. I'm a partner of mobiu스캐피털파트너스. We have two mutual funds, one listed in London and one in Luxembourg, where we invest in mid-sized companies throughout emerging markets. Our performance has been very good with the top performing of the emerging markets fund around the world in the last 4 years. And we continue to look for good companies with low debt, high earnings potential, pricing power, and high return on capital.
You witnessed the economic crisis caused by inflation in the 1970s. At that time, inflation had been uncontrolled for over a decade. Do you think we face that kind of a long-term inflation risk?
Yes, we do, because the money supply has grown so rapidly. In the US, money supply has gone up by something like 40–50%. And in Korea also, money supply has exploded in the last 4 or 5 years. So when you have money supply going up by 40, 50, 60, 70%, that means the currency will be devaluing by at least that much. And that, of course, leads to higher prices and inflation.
How do you think the Fed should deal with this inflation situation?
The problem with raising interest rates, of course, is that it has a very negative effect on the economy, at least in the short term. So the solution for central banks is, first of all, to cut the money supply as a way to stop the devaluation of the currency, and not to raise interest rates so suddenly, but to do it over a very long period of time. And of course, the key to stopping inflation is money. In other words, stop the supply of money.
The possibility of a recession has increased as the Fed raised interest rates. In fact, it is making waves in the stock market as well. With the stock market often experiencing short-term rallies, do you think it has bottomed out?
Well, the market probably has not bottomed out yet, because we don't see the psychological moment of despondency. In other words, when everyone is despondently selling, that means we're at the bottom. But we haven't seen that yet. So we probably have more to go. But nevertheless, we're in a situation where we are definitely in a bear market, with markets down by 30–40% or more around the world. So we are definitely in a bear market, but no one can pick the bottom. As I said, the psychological moment is when everyone has given up.
You said the stock market hasn't bottomed out yet. So when do you expect that to happen?
No one knows when you're going to hit the floor. No one knows that. It could be tomorrow, it could be next year. But I must say this, bear markets normally last about a year, year and a half, no more than 2 years. So we're already almost into a year of bear market year. So I think we're now closer to the end.
So when should we see a chance to re-enter the stock market?
Well, the best time to invest is when you have money. That's what we always like to say. And the reason why we say that is that there are always going to be good companies with good earnings, with strong balance sheets, with high return on capital, with pricing power. And when markets are down, that's probably the best time to buy those companies. So it's not a good idea to wait until the bottom or wait till you think the bottom has been reached. It's best to first look at the companies and buy those that have low debt, as I mentioned, and good pricing power.
The Ukraine war is not over, and there is always the China-Taiwan thing that is one of the major risks in the future. How likely are these geopolitical issues to affect the stock market?
They're having a big impact on the stock market. If you look at the Chinese market, If you just look at the Chinese bond market, it's in a big decline because of the political situation in China and the concern that she will introduce much harsher measures to pull back on business. So definitely the geopolitical situation is very, very important. And if you look at the Taiwan situation, as you know, the U.S. government is now making measures to protect Taiwan and to confront China on its efforts to take over Taiwan. So this is quite a sensitive and difficult issue, not only for Taiwan, not only for China, not only for the U.S., but for Korea, for Japan, and for other countries in Southeast Asia.
If there are promising stocks that will continue to grow despite such negative market conditions, please recommend them.
Yeah, there are a number of industries that are doing quite well. If you look at the mining industry, as you know, many of the mining companies are doing quite well. And the semiconductor industry, although recently there's been some oversupply in certain areas, but generally speaking, with anything to do with technology is doing quite well and will continue to do well.
Do you think there is a country that can avoid a recession? India, for example, is doing relatively well now. How do you view the Indian market, and do you have any stocks to recommend in that market?
Yes, the Indian market is doing very well. As you know, the economic growth for India is probably one of the highest in the world now, at about 7%. And part of the reason for that, of course, is that India is introducing much more digitization of the economy, and that's making things more efficient. And of course, you've got a very large population, 1.2 or 1.3 billion, and a young population, which is quite positive. So what I would recommend in India would be companies that are doing infrastructure work, companies that are making materials for infrastructure, such as pipes and tubes, and companies in the software business, doing software, that sort of thing.
How about China? Economic indicators from China over the past quarter, including economic growth, are quite pessimistic.
Yes, China is in a very difficult position now because, you know, they have this property crisis. You know, property in China is very, very important because most people invest in property as a long-term investment. And it's not the same in the U.S. In the U.S., a stock market investment is more important. But in China, property is very, very important. And with property prices in China going down, efforts by the government to help the property market have not really worked yet. And the bonds of property companies in China are going down very rapidly. People are exiting, both domestic and foreign investors are getting out. So it's quite a difficult situation, I would say, for China. And the end is not in sight, given the political situation, the fears that Xi Jinping will crack down more on business. So that's a worrying development.
In your opinion, as an investor, what are the large global investors thinking at this point? Are they going to allocate it to emerging market stocks or trying to bring the money to their safety home in the United States?
Some of the large investors are definitely looking at emerging countries because they see the emerging countries are still growing faster than the developed countries, such as India. India is growing much faster than the US or Europe. That's one thing. The second thing is a lot of the emerging market currencies have devalued massively. So it's a good chance to buy these currencies at low prices. And the third thing is that many of these emerging market companies are benefiting from the weakness of their currency because they're exporting. So their costs are in local currency, which are devalued against the US dollar, and their income is from US dollar exports. So lots of opportunities in emerging markets.
If you are investing in emerging market, is there any standard for distinguishing between risky and safe areas?
Of course, you know, the risk comes from debt. That is the big risk that you have, whether it's government debt or whether it's company debt. So I would say investors have to focus on debt. Try to avoid companies that have any debt at all, and also try to avoid countries that have too much debt as well.
How do you view the Korean stock market? Is there any possibility of foreign exodus? How should we prepare for the future bear market?
We are already in a bear market in Korea, as you know. The market's down by more than 30%. So we are in a bear market in Korea. And whenever you have such a bear market, there are opportunities, as I mentioned, but only in those companies with the characteristics I just outlined.
You have long recommended investing in gold. Is it still valid?
Yes, it's so important to have some physical gold in your portfolio. Gold does not pay any interest, but gold is a very good safe haven in the event of a total chaos in the markets, and when there is a very big political upheaval, then it's good to have some gold.
Recently, there has been a lot of advice on Wall Street to increase the proportion of bonds invested. Please tell me a smart way to invest in bonds.
The smart way to invest in bonds is to avoid poor lenders. In other words, lenders that will not be able to pay back. So that means companies that are too much leveraged, have too much debt, and countries that have too much debt. Because the first principle of a bond is that you want to get paid back the original amount that you put in, at least. The second principle, of course, is that you want to have an interest rate which is higher than the expected inflation rate. So, for example, if inflation in America is now 8%, which it is on the CPI, you don't want to buy a bond which is paying less than 8%. Because if you do, your earnings will be wiped out by inflation.
Lastly, what advice would you give to individual investors?
I would say to individual investors that the first principle, of course, is to own your own home. So if you don't own your own home, don't think about investing in the stock market or in the bond market. Do that first. Then after you own your own home, then begin investing in stocks through mutual funds. Get some good mutual funds that are globally diversified. In other words, don't invest only in Korea, but also in countries around the world. And usually a global or international fund is a good vehicle for which to do that.
Mark Mobius, thank you so much for joining us here on Talks with Global Group.
Thank you very much.
네, 오늘은 마크 모비우스 모비우스캐피털파트너스 설립자와 이야기 나눠봤습니다. 모비우스 설립자는 주식시장이 약세장에 있지만 아직 바닥을 치지는 않았다고 경고했는데요. 바닥을 기다리기보다는 가격 결정력 등을 가진 이른바 좋은 기업이라면 지금이 투자의 적기라고도 봤습니다. 또 인도 같은 신흥국 시장에도 여전히 기회가 있다고 진단했다는 점 참고하시기를 바라겠습니다. 글로벌 구루에게 듣는다 여기까지입니다. 시청해주신 여러분 고맙습니다.